Today, we're going to talk about chimichangas, burritos, and pot pies. And also going to talk about flour and why some forms of flour will store indefinitely and others will only store for a few months. I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking about flour. Okay, I embarked upon an experiment a while back that I really didn't think was going to work. I decided that I was going to do some burritos, some chimichangas, and yes, I was even going to do some pot pies. So take a look at this picture. This was my first attempt. You can see the economy pot pies in there, and then you can see that one that's been cut in half, which was one of the big Marie Callender pot pies that was too thick to you couldn't put it in the tray and slide it onto the freeze dryer because it was too thick, so I had to cut it in half. And I'll let you know here in just a little bit exactly what happened with that little experiment. We had some successes and we had some failures too. But before I get into the chimichangas and the burritos end of it, I want to draw your attention to this right here. This is wheat berries. This is soft wheat, and this is a bag of flour. And you know, there's a world of difference between those two as I search about and look for ways of storing flour and look for ways of storing wheat. And there's a wide range of things that you can do to either store flour for the short term or for the long term. Now, the one thing that people seem to be concerned with is the oil that's in flour, and that draws a question to me. The oil in this wheat right here, this wheat hasn't changed since the day I bottled it, and this wheat here is 13 years old. I bottled this 13 years ago. The date on it is 7/08, and it's just as good now as the day when I put it in there. So if oil was that big of a concern, how come it isn't a concern here? How come the oil inside of here isn't going rancid or doing all the weird things that people like to tell you that oil will do, which it will in certain quantity and under certain conditions. As a matter of fact, most conditions, if the quantity is enough, oil is really a bad thing for storage. But why does it work in wheat? Why does it work here? To whereas in this, there are several different things that you can do. If you're going to open up that bag, it's good on your shelf for about 3 months. If the bag remains unopened, it's good on your shelf for anywhere from 8 months to a year. If the bag remains unopened and you put it in your freezer, it's good for indefinitely. It's good for 15, 20, 25 years, as long as it stays frozen in your freezer. So I got to thinking, if oil was a problem all the time and no matter what you do, then you might as well give up on half the stuff that you freeze dried, because you find oil in everything, especially meat. No matter how well you cook that meat, no matter how well you rinse it and drain it and squeeze it and everything, you're going to get a percentage of oil left in the meat, and yet meat can be freeze dried for 25, 30 years, okay? And there's going to be more oil in that meat than there is in this jar of wheat berries. Okay, you're going to find oil in vegetables. You got shortenings, you got vegetable oils, you got corn oils, you got canola, you've got oil in just about every kind of seed that you want. So oil isn't really the big problem that you have when freeze drying food, unless of course you got too much of it. There's too high a quantity of it. Then it becomes a problem. So that's what you need to watch out for. As far as that goes, potatoes don't have any oil in them at all. And my wife and I, when we first moved into this house 22 years ago, put up a bunch of dehydrated potatoes, and we jarred them in these half-gallon jars, and this is one of those jars. This jar is over 21 years old. And those potatoes in there, they don't look like they're breaking down, they don't look like they're shredding, and they're not discoloring or anything else. The vacuum is still there, which is a real testament to these Kerr jars. The vacuum that we put on these jars, as a matter of fact, I didn't use I didn't have a freeze dryer. I didn't even know what a freeze dryer was back then. I used a little system. It was a hand vacuum pump. You poke a hole in the top of the jar, and then you put this special tape on it, and then you put this hand pump over the top, and you pump it up and down, and it draws a vacuum on there. And that little piece of rubber underneath that tape will suck down and seal up the hole. And by golly, it's worked really well. Because the cap hasn't come up yet. There's still the little dimple in the plastic, and these potatoes look just fine. Okay, so I'm real cautious and real weary about when people say, oh, this has a shelf life this, or if you store this for too long, for 25 or 30 years, under a vacuum pack, under an oxygen-free environment, that, 25 or 30 years, what's going to happen to it? Exactly what's going to happen to it. Is it suddenly going to, just start to break down and turn into mush? There's no moisture in there. Is it going to have some little bug in there eating it all? There aren't any bugs in there. You freeze-dried it, okay? You vacuum-packed it. There's no oxygen in there to deteriorate anything. So I'm real skeptical about people when they tell me that something has a very, very short lifespan if you pack it right. But if you don't pack it right, well, then they may be right, okay? But the three big destroyers of foodstuffs is, of course, oxygen, moisture, and heat, and not necessarily in that order. So what is it about flour? If you do flour correctly and deprive it of the oxygen, deprive it of moisture, and keep it in a relatively cool environment like anything else, it will last for years and years and years, okay? The one thing that you should do with flour before you do anything like that is to stick it in your freezer for several days. And if you'll do that, it will kill any little uninvited guests that might be crawling around in it, these microscopic little things, or their unborn children. So if you want to store flour for a long time, put it in the freezer. Keep it in there for 4 or 5 days, and then take it out and seal it up. Put it in a Mylar bag, and in the large Mylar bags or whatever you want to do with it. And it will last for a long, long time. Because what is it that is the big enemy to flour? It's not oxygen, okay? It's not heat. What the enemy of flour is moisture. The moisture in the air, because flour will eventually absorb moisture right out of the air. That's why opened is 3 months, closed it's 7, 8 to up to 12 months or to a year. In the freezer, when it's completely frozen and unable to absorb moisture, it can last indefinitely. And so what that means is that you can store flour, and you can store it for a long time if you do it correctly, if you deprive it of the three destroyers. Now, what about oil that you added? Here I got chimichangas in here, and these things are absolutely dry. I have broke several of them in half. They're already bagged up here, but they're dried all the way through. But oddly enough, that's not the way they came out of the freeze dryer. After 60 hours, well, 58, yeah, I think it was 58 hours in the freeze dryer, they came out, and when I picked one of them up, it felt dry. It was, I was ready to bag it up. But I took one of them and I snapped it in half, and up and down the middle of that chimichanga and those burritos was a pencil. It was a little area about the diameter of a pencil that went the whole length of it. Okay, and it was cold, and that means that not all of the ice had sublimated out of the chimichanga, and that was going to be a problem. And I didn't know how I was going to handle that at the time, because it had gone over, I believe, 15 hours. I had put up to 15 hours of final dry in the freeze dryer, and it still left that middle, that little bit in the middle. And what I do is I call that the blanket effect. Okay, this chimichanga here, it dried, the tortilla, it dried very well. And then what was just under the tortilla dried very well too. But what that did was that formed a blanket around the very core of this chimichanga. and that blanket prevented the moisture from escaping as quickly as it did the rest of the chimichanga. I've seen this happen with, it happened with the pot pies, it happened with lasagna, I've seen it happen with spaghetti sauce, so I'm very cognizant of the blanket effect. It happens in reverse with the cheese. Cheese will dehydrate very, very well if it's in a block, but try to rehydrate it. It will develop a slimy, thick blanket around the outside of the block that'll prevent water from getting back into it. So it's something that you need to watch out for. So what did I do? Well, I thought, you know, I didn't want to put it back in the freeze dryer for another 12 or 14 or 16 hours or however long I thought it was gonna take. But I got the idea to turn to an old friend, and that was my dehydrator. My dehydrator that I've had for so many years and that I've badmouthed as far as food storage goes because of what it does to food. However, when it comes to something that is already been 95% dried, and you just got to mop up just a little bit of moisture that might be left inside of it, the freeze dryer is the ticket. It's the way to go. I packed 18 of these chimichangas, and well, there was 9 chimichangas and 9 burritos into here, and turned it on and left it overnight. And when I got up the next morning and I came down and I took one of those burritos and I cracked it in half, sure enough, this little sweetheart here dried them, aired and bone dry, and they were ready for packaging. As a matter of fact, they are packaged right here. But you might say, hey, well, Evan, what about the oil in these things? If you can't do a pie crust, isn't that the same as a chimichanga? Well, the answer is emphatically no, it's not. And if you're into baking at all, you understand that principle, that pie crust and chimichangas are infinitely different when it comes to their ability to freeze dry. Now, the pot pies, on the other hand, they did the same thing. They came out and they had just a little bit of moisture left inside of them. So I put 4 of those pot pies, and these are the ones you saw in that picture. I put 4 of them in the dehydrator, and I left them in there along with the chimichangas overnight. But I decided on a little experiment. I was going to leave 2 of them out, okay? And because I picked out the one that I thought was the driest and the one that I thought was the wettest. And they really weren't wet at all. They were just, you could just feel the cold inside of them. And I put them in this bag, and I've left them, and the results have been rather interesting. On these that I took out of the freeze dryer after 12 hours, that crust is still hard, okay? And the inside was absolutely dry. But the problem is, although that crust is hard, if I was to take a piece of that crust and feel it and rub it between my fingers, you can still feel that silky, oily feeling inside of here. So no, I've decided against doing pot pies and treating them the same way I treat any other pie. And so what I did was I made pot pie filling, okay? And I've bagged several bags of this stuff, and I put this in the jar so that you could see it. But this is the same filling that was in these pot pies. And when you go to make pot pies, well, you're going to have to make the crust and then use this as a filling, and you'll have fresh pot pies. So what's the difference between a chimichanga here and a pot pie or a pie crust? Well, if you'll get online or go to anybody that's a baker and ask them how you make pie crust. And the bottom line in there is you will use roughly 1 part butter or lard or oil to 2 parts flour. In other words, I think it's just over 2.5 cups of flour, you're going to use 1 cup of oil. And that's just too much oil to be able to effectively freeze dry it. You will not be able to eliminate the oil or make it sufficiently dry to where it will not affect what you're trying to freeze dry. Whereas in a chimichanga, if you get online, and with that I say online because that's what I do. I'm not really a baker and that, and so I researched it. And to make a tortilla, it requires to every 2 cups of flour only 3 tablespoons of butter or margarine. okay, to whereas a pie crust requires 16 tablespoons, a tortilla only requires 3. And by the time you've got that all mixed in there and you've got it flattened out and the tortilla's been baked a little bit on a tortilla pan, that oil, you can handle it. All right, freeze drying will handle it without a big problem, and it'll last for a very, very long time. Now, granted, my chimichangas are going to go into my 3 to 7 box, which means I have certain things that I don't trust that I want to last for 25 years or 30 years. So I have my 5 to 7 section that I will use within 5 years. And I will let it go up to 7 years before I open it up and see how it's doing. I wish that I knew right now exactly what belonged in that box and what didn't belong in that box, but I'm just going to have to use my smarts about that. This chimichangas do have some oil in them, but not very much at all. And these things are just as dry as can be. That chimichanga, that flour tortilla, it just snaps like a cracker, a saltine cracker. So I'm fairly happy with that. Now, as for these two, these are the ones that I didn't put in the dehydrator. Okay, I want you to look at this. Look at the mold on that. That was just a little tiny bit of water that was in there. It was just, you could barely feel it. It was cold. But it was enough to where it spread back out into the rest of the pot pie, and this thing's about 2 weeks old, and there is a thick, heavy layer of mold there. My wife, she's been after me. She said, oh, throw that away, throw that away. That could happen, maybe not this quickly, because this is exposed to oxygen and moisture in the air and everything else it needs for mold to proliferate. This one, on the other hand, this was funny. This one came out along with this one, and it didn't have quite as much moisture into it, but the difference was, for me, was nominal. I couldn't tell any difference. This one didn't mold, but if I punch down on it, all of this crust and the inside is soft, meaning that there was enough water in here for it to make the crust soft. And it's beyond me to explain how come this one molded so badly and all this one did was get soft. And then these 4 that came out of the dehydrator, when you punch that crust down on there, it cracks like a saltine cracker. Okay? But these were economy class pot pies. They just weren't too appetizing after they freeze dry. So I don't think I'll do that. I'd rather make my own pot pie filling. And that way I can control the salt and the other ingredients, even the butters and oils that go into it, which there weren't any for this. But I went ahead and decided that flour is okay if you do it right, okay? You can make stuff out of flour. Pie crusts are not, because of the extraordinary amount of oil that's in them. Things that are made with chimichangas or burritos or tortillas, they're okay because there is such a small amount of oil that's used in those. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and bag the rest of these up. There are 6 here. Each of these bags has 6 chimichangas, and the other bag has 6 burritos in it. And what I do is I put 2 to a Ziploc bag, and that way so that the user can simply pour in 3/4 cups of water in this bag. They'll be able to seal it up and put it for 8 to 12 hours in their refrigerator while these 2 chimichangas balance out their rehydration. But when I put these in the bag, I don't zip them up. I leave them open so that they can. So when I vacuum pack them, the air will be able to escape. Okay, so we'll put those 2 in there like that. We'll put those 2 in there right next to them. Tuck it down nice and tight. And I'll put the oxygen absorber in there. And then the other 2 chimichangas. Okay, now that's in there nice and tight. I can go ahead and seal them up. put that on there. Put it down so that it clamps, and then pull on a little bit, and it will get the wrinkles out of it. And I'll seal that up. Okay, that's a real good seal. Now, to go ahead and vacuum pack it. Cut that little corner off there. Take my vacuum packer, stick it in the little opening I just cut, making sure not to go through the other side, which would be a pain in the rear. But anyhow, okay, let's vacuum pack them. Okay, that's good enough. Pull that out. Make sure I got a nice flat surface to work with here. Put it on the sealer and seal it. And there you have it. All right, flour tortillas. More flour than oil. It's a sufficient difference to where you can do that. And that, like I say, will go in my 3 to 7 box. I'll open up one, and if they're still good, after 5 years, I'll let the other 2 go for a few more years, and I'll open up the other one, and that's the way I rotate through my 5 to 7 box. Now, the proof, they say, is in the pudding. I took 2 of those, ta-da, and I rehydrated them. These were actually in there for rehydration in the refrigerator, probably for better than 24 hours, because I did these yesterday. But not too long ago, about a half an hour ago, I went up and I pan-fried these to see how they would turn out. And I was pleased with the way that they rehydrated. But you know, that looks like a chimichanga. You'd never be able to tell the difference. Excellent. If you look here, you can see that middle is just as soft and flavorful and tasty as can be. The tortilla is crunchy. It was flavorful. The inside was completely rehydrated. So that's a success story. I was very pleased to find out that you could do that. You not have to worry about tortillas when you're trying to prepare stuff for long-term storage. Now, I think in the future I may try to actually freeze dry just the tortilla. I'm not sure exactly how I'll do that. I might roll it up into a roll and then experiment with ways to rehydrate it. I'm sure it'll dehydrate, or it'll freeze dry very, very well, but rehydration can be a challenge on a rolled up tortilla like that. Again, I want to emphasize that everybody that has a freeze dryer really ought to have a dehydrator too, because now I've discovered they work hand in hand. The freeze dryer allows you to add more dry time to it, but I found out that that's not nearly as efficient energy-wise or use-wise as using the dehydrator to finish up mopping up that last little bit of moisture and getting rid of it. It'll use less energy, and it'll free up your freeze dryer so that you can defrost it and get it going on the next batch. So with that, I consider this a success story. The pot pies, no, I won't freeze dry a pot pie again. I simply make the pot pie filling, and just like my pumpkin pies or my apple pies or my other pies, I will make the pie crust when the time comes. White flour will store for a very, very long time if it's properly prepared, because you want to isolate it from moisture more than anything else. That's not to say that oxygen and heat won't have an effect, but with flour, the big thing is moisture, because if the oil in it was really something to be considered, the oil, I think, really reacts with the moisture and the oxygen, and that's what makes the oil such a concern. But the mere fact that I can store wheat berries for 12 years, 13 years now, without any adverse effects. I'm sure if I took these wheat berries out of here and ground them into flour, I could make a loaf of bread, you know, just like any other. So it's not that big a deal. So with that, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel. I hope that you will share this with other people that might be interested in discovering how to deal with flour and how to deal with floured products. I'm working on a project right now. I'm looking into how to do bread, surprisingly enough. So you're going to want to stick around for that. So subscribe so that you can know about how I'm thinking about doing bread. And I think it's the way that it's coming along, it's going to do very, very well. So yeah, hit the notification bell, like, subscribe, and tell your friends about it. And as usual, visit my gallery. There's the address right there. Take a look at my work and tell me what you think. That's kind of one of the driving forces behind what I do. So with that, I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking about chimichangas.